Awesome, Tony. Thank you for that Carrot update. We'll check in with you again throughout the show with more Carrot updates. Right now, we're going to welcome our next guest, and that's going to be Peter Rinsler, CEO over at Metaphora. Peter, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, Anthony. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, and Peter, I'm excited about this one, and I'm always excited to get to chat with you because, of course, years ago we went through our consultant, really in the trenches mindset, and really having to really go through, I think, the ups and downs of an economy, and really having to advise our clients on what the best thing to do during times of recession. Now, I know from that time frame, a lot of folks were just, panicked, like, hey, it's recession, cut everything, cut, jobs, cut investing, just stop it all. Tell me about that mindset.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think we have the fortune of working with a lot of different businesses in the space, and we work with small companies and large companies, and privately owned and publicly traded, and private equity backed, and owned by the family. And one thing that we've consistently seen over and over again in the last 2 or 3 years is that those that are very intentional about how they continue investing and navigating during a recession are the ones that are ultimately successful in the long run. I think, Anthony, that's really how we think about it, is that you really have to be hyper intentional about where you're spending your energy and resources and money, but now is not the time to cut everything to the bare bones. You're just going to hurt yourself and get further behind your competition in the long run.
Nice to see you. And I think you make a great point. You get kind of, when you start investing, or if you stop investing and cut to the bare bones, you fall behind. I mean, is there other reasons like why it's important to keep investing, to try to keep growing in these periods of recessions?
Yeah, recessions are interesting for a few reasons. One is that generally, labor markets tend to turn, and you're able to get new team members at a competitive cost basis, which might allow you to have access to resources or team members that you might not have before in a booming economy and a more challenging job market. Another reason is that in our experience, customers are more willing to be creative about trying new things. So it can actually be, recessions can be an incredible time to drive innovation because, for instance, one of your customers may be willing to try a new piece of technology that you want to implement in exchange for a 5% discount. Now, in the short term, that 5% discount might hurt a little bit, but in the long run, the insights that you get out of trying that new innovative technology could pay for itself within a few months. So I think that there are lots of reasons beyond just kind of staying up with competition to continue investing through recessions. And there are a lot of kind of qualitative factors that make it a really interesting time for businesses to grow and innovate and set the stage for scale.
Certainly. And Peter, of course, you mentioned being able to invest in things like technology, hiring, and other aspects throughout these times of recession can really power you to be innovative and efficient throughout the recession and come out ahead on the other side of the business cycle. Are there any companies that you can kind of think of that really kind of show a good example of this? Of course, I'm thinking of companies that are innovative like Molo or Redwood. Can you talk to some of those?
Yeah, so a couple interesting examples, particularly if you look at kind of the pandemic and the COVID-19 cycle that we saw throughout kind of Q2, Q3 of 2020. And a couple of the ones that you mentioned, Molo was, I mean, golly, at the beginning of 2020, Molo was still very much a kind of fast-growing, scrappy, do whatever it takes to provide the best service possible business mentality. And they continued investing in hiring, training, recruiting, and technology throughout the pandemic, continued serving their customers. And I mean, I think when all was said and done, they tripled the size of their business over the last 2.5 years. It's just an incredible example of where kind of maintaining a North Star as your guiding light and continuing making progress against that is really important. I think, you mentioned Redwood Logistics, I would say, Redwood has done a really nice job of, a couple of things that we think are really important during recessions are, one, being really intentional about where you spend your money and how you invest your time. Number two is making sure that you're measuring the results and the outcomes that you're achieving for the selective investments that you are making. And then three is really making tough decisions about cutting cutting investments or new initiatives that you might not be seeing the return as expected. And I think Redwood did a really great job of all three of those in terms of investing in their Connect product, investing in a handful of acquisitions, continuing hiring, and ultimately positioning them for a very successful transaction, at the tail end of 2021.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about it having that North Star as that guiding light. I mean, do you find that companies that maybe don't have that or kind of get lost in the, I don't want to say media hype, but all the craze of recession, they kind of lose that focus? I mean, are they the ones that don't make it through or have the issues or set themselves up to, I don't want to say fail, but they definitely don't have that growth factor on the back end as we come out of a recessionary period?
Yeah, and Tony, I would say that I think I would describe it as the businesses that kind of lose sight of where they're going make things harder for themselves than they need to. Like they end up laying off really great talent as opposed to trying to figure out where those folks could have an impact on their business. And then when the business turns around in a couple months, then they're scrambling to go rehire the folks that they turned over, and now there's a loss of trust in the business, and so on and so forth. I think that there are a lot in our industry specifically. There are a lot of folks that get caught up in the media craze and the noise of the recession and make reactive, panic-driven decisions. And I also believe that in our experience, you're more likely to make those reactive, short-sighted decisions when you don't have kind of a long-term vision for where you want the business to go. I think that if I look at the team at TI, Transportation Insight, and NTG, the combined entity there, TI Holdco, they effectively brought in an almost entirely new leadership team in the first 6 months of 2020. And in the last 2 years, I think have probably accomplished more than any other business in the industry that I've seen in such a short period of time. I mean, they've completely integrated the two businesses, turned over, enabled and installed a new leadership team, set new business and technology vision. And I think that it's just a really good example of how kind of like setting a vision and a strategy for the business and then relentlessly making decisions in support of that vision can really allow you to move quickly and cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. And I think that that's what's most important to be successful during a recession is to set the North Star and make the tough decisions that allow you to pursue that.
And Peter, one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier on, I think is something that can't be glossed over, and that's really being able to invest in training. At times in economic growth periods and robust growth cycles, you see a lot of folks really just, hiring, and then just say, forget about training. A lot of revenue is just going to cover up a lot of mistakes. Now's the time for really being efficient. Can you talk to that training aspect a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And y'all have had me on here enough to know that I'm incredibly passionate about training and the importance of investing in training and the ROI of enabling your people from an early stage. Unfortunately, when businesses hit tough times, one of the first areas we see cost-cutting measures implemented is they cut back on training. They stop taking people away from their jobs to go get training. They stop investing money into the courses. And to me, it's probably one of the most short-sighted decisions you could possibly make for a business. Ultimately, particularly as technology becomes more and more a part the day-to-day operations of our businesses, the role that people play in your company is actually increasing exponentially, because you have technology to handle the easily automated tasks, which means that over time, your people are really working on the most challenging, the exceptions, if you will. And so you want those people trained to be successful in their roles. It's motivating, it's encouraging. There are countless studies about the importance of what the current workforce looks for in their employers, and one of those is training and leadership development. Anyway, I could go on and on about this topic, but I really do think that it's critical that now is the right time to invest in your training. And just quick anecdotally, and then we can, I think we might have to close. But for our business, right now we're at about 100, 110 total team members. And pre-COVID, we were around 25 or so. So we've grown substantially over the last couple of years. And I would say that, I think of our current team, probably 80% of those folks have joined our business since the pandemic, and they've been a part of new training initiatives that we've put in place. And I think it's just an example of how recessions can be a really great time to find incredible team members, and the long-term impact that can have on your business if you go into it with the right mentality.
Awesome. Well, Peter, I think that's an excellent example and an excellent segment here. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. It's always a pleasure having you on for It Was Night.
Thanks, Sean.